Hi, I'm Josh Ewing, owner and instructor here at Eastside Music Academy, and this is part 2 in the video series Unlocking Your Musical Creativity. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch the first video in the series, I definitely encourage you to do that, as it's going to give you some really helpful background information to today's video. Last time we covered the concept of major scales. We talked about C and G major, and we briefly touched on the circle of fifths. I want to review those concepts just a little bit today, but I also want to get into another really important musical concept, and that's intervals. Intervals are so crucial in your understanding of not only the circle of fifths, but also chords, and so many different things in music. So we're going to begin to touch on the concept of intervals today. Okay. Before we get started talking about intervals, let's just do a quick review from the first video. We briefly touched on the concept of the major scale, which, as you remember, is kind of has a happy, positive sound to it, and I showed you examples of both the C and the G major scale. We also talked about the circle of fifths, and how as we go around the circle of fifths, we're adding sharps to our different scales or adding flats depending on which direction we're going. And we talked about sharps and flats and how we play those and what those look like, and how each scale has its own personality. So again, if you haven't watched the first video, I definitely encourage you to do that. That'll give you some good background for what we're going to be talking about today. And as we talk about intervals, this is going to help you in your understanding, especially with the circle of fifths and how those key signatures relate to one another. An interval, simply put, is the distance between two notes. Okay, an interval can be a small distance or it can be a large distance. So what I'm going to do is just show you some examples on the piano of just some basic intervals. And we're not going to do all of them, just simply for the sake of time, but I'm going to do some just to give you a general idea of what they look like and how they sound. So the smallest interval that we have in music is the interval of a second. Okay, it's just two notes, or two white keys in this case, played right next to each other. Okay, so we're not skipping any white keys. We're just playing them together. Okay, very small interval. And here is the interval of a second. We call it a second because it's spanning two letter names. Okay, as we move up to the next interval, we just move up the number system from 2 to 3, so we have an interval of a third. And interval of a third, we're skipping a white key in this case, and it's spanning three letter names, so the distance just got a little bit bigger. And here is the interval of a third. Continuing up, we have the interval of a fourth, now spanning four letter names, and we're skipping now two white keys in between. And by the way, I'm using the C major scale, so in this case I am using the notes C and F, okay, and skipping D and E. So here's the interval of a fourth. Continuing on, we go to the interval of a fifth, spanning five letter names, skipping three white keys in this case. And here is the interval of a fifth. Now there are many more intervals, and there's subgroups of the intervals that I just played, and we'll get into that more in later videos. But you can see that it's just a very simple concept. The intervals, as we go up the number system, the distance becomes larger, and this is just very important to understand and to be able to learn by ear what these different intervals sound like. Now, how does that relate to the circle of fifths? I brought that up before. Well, let's talk about that. We call it the circle of fifths because the system is based off of the interval of a fifth. And I played that for you, C to G. Now that could be, any number of notes, okay, depending on which note you're starting on. But as we understand the interval of a fifth, that helps us navigate through the different key signatures. And that's what we're going to take a look at next. Like I mentioned earlier, understanding intervals is going to help you understand the circle of fifths. So I put the circle of fifths back up here on the screen so you can follow along. And so let's take a look at the very top at C major, and we talked about that last time. C major, if we go to the right, that brings us to G major. Now C to G is the interval of a fifth. If we go from G to the next key signature to the right, that brings us to D. That's another interval of a fifth. D to A major is a fifth, A to E, and so on. Okay, going to the left from C major, same principle, except we're going down the piano. So C, an interval of a fifth down, is F. And that brings us to F major, starting our flat key signatures. So, what an easy way to remember key signatures. And thinking about it in terms of intervals will help you memorize your key signatures much faster. And we'll also get into how it also has to do with the order of sharps and flats are also based off of the interval of a fifth. So that's going to help you memorize which sharps and which flats are in each key signature. So that's just a little bit about intervals, and we're going to be touching more on that. But what I would encourage you to do is go through the circle of fifths, use the concept of intervals that we talked about today to help memorize your key signatures. Do that. We're going to touch on more concepts in the next video. Once again, thanks for watching, and I hope you found this helpful and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, and have a great day.